All right. Yeah, I have the Shure SM7B, and then that goes into a Scarlett 2i2, and then I have the
got that too.
DBX 286S. So, but I've even wondered, let's see, if you have the DBX, I don't know, the first block of controls, I'm not sure if it's working yet or working properly, or the dial is not working because it doesn't light up when I talk.
Interesting. Okay.
So I've kind of guessed on the settings, but I bought it as a refurb during COVID when you couldn't find any of the stuff.
Gotcha. I find, and most people will say the Cloud Lifter just gives you that boost because it's the
lately
Shure
I've
mic
been
is stepped down by default.
Yeah, I've been cranking my gain, and they're like, "That'll fix that."
And that's the tricky part, is then you start to sound a bit crunchy, or potentially so. Whereas if you boost it with a Cloud Lifter, then you have more headroom on your gain.
Oh, okay.
Which is helpful on the other end.
Yeah.
I actually have another Cloud Lifter that I'm not using. So if you give me your address, I'll send it to you.
I'll buy it. Well, I'll buy it from you. I'll send you money.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's. I didn't want this podcast to turn into a transactional thing, but if you want to buy it,
I'll pay you money.
Do it.
Yeah.
All right.
I will.
Awesome. Sounds good.
I'm just gonna tweet this out. And I'm going to tag you. It doesn't look like X updated the new title, which is okay. Not great, but okay. All right. Let's see. Brad, do you have any fun things to talk about? To just chat.
Going to a remix, or not a remix meetup, a React meetup tonight. Shashi's going to be there. A couple other folks I know. I kind of like rallied the troops before committing to going, so it should be fun.
Cool.
Taylor Dustin's here, but I don't feel like we have a strong tech community, at least not like you do in Austin.
Man, you say that. Austin has 0 conferences. Now they do have like 2 or 3 decent meetups, but no conferences, which I find wild.
Really nothing?
Nothing.
I feel like I've seen something in Austin. Maybe not.
Smashing used to be here, then they stopped it. That conference used to be here. That's gone. That's it.
R.I.P.
Oh.
Nashville's known for our healthcare, so if you're big into that,
it's like healthcare. Like you can go there and get good healthcare.
Yeah. Do what? What'd you say, Ryan?
Nashville is like where you go to get your health.
Well, it's like where a lot of the business side of hospitals, I think, are. Like HCA is here. I don't even know what HCA stands for. That's just like the big one that everybody's, I don't know, employed by. Country music is big
country
too.
Music, of course.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah. We went to go see Vitamin String Quartet. I didn't tell you that, Brad.
Vitamin String Quartet was
So it's a I think it's 2 violins, a viola, and a cello, and they just cover pop songs.
Cool.
Yeah. The show that we saw was specifically covering, well, I say specifically, Taylor Swift and Bridgerton, if you watched that show. But like on Bridgerton, they have, like, I only watched the first season. Apparently all the music from Bridgerton is like Vitamin String Quartet, but they're like playing pop songs. So they played like Bad Guys by Billie Eilish, and is it Eilish, right? That sounded weird.
Billie Eilish.
But it was funny because Henry and I were talking after. We're like, they said they were going to cover Taylor songs, but I think they only did like 3. I was like, does that count as like a theme? But it was kind of interesting. We were probably in the minority. Like, I loved them, and they were like, hey, if you're wondering, just sing along with us. And so everybody in the crowd singing along, which I know is a concert thing, but it was also like, I want to hear the quartet. Like, I want to hear all the strings. And so like because it's all instrumental, the people singing along did not know all the words. So the people behind us are singing like off key and only half the words. And then there was this one lady that was really drunk and just clapping along, but not on beat.
Oh no. Makes all the worse.
So we're like, I like them, but also I think I would have just liked to hear it in my house. So
That's funny.
Anyways, we're also turning into old fogies.
I think something that really grinds my gears is people that clap on 1 and 3 instead of 2 and 4. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or people who can't clap on beat at all, which is all too common.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. There's also a thing with the violin, which I didn't realize. It's called shredding. We're just like,
yep.
I don't know what other than to describe. And there were several moments where this guy would start shredding, and I was like, oh, I just feel like he's going to ruin his violin. Like, it just kind of made me cringe a little bit.
Do you know what you're doing, sir?
I know.
That's funny.
Obviously, I don't. So we can get into it. We'll go ahead and start. Let me cue up the music. All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web design and development with a little bit of zest. In today's episode, we will be talking about all of Prisma's latest and greatest features. I don't know about you, but I don't like to work with databases without it. So I'm super excited to talk to Ryan about all the new features.
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compress.
Hello, my name is Amy Dutton. I am a lead maintainer on the Redwood.js core team.
Hey, y'all. My name is Brad Garapi. I'm a senior front-end developer at Stripe.
And as I mentioned, we have my good friend, Ryan, on the show. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here today.
Yeah. So I do mean what I said. I don't like working with databases without Prisma.
Okay.
I'm even working on a project right now with Supabase, and I'm like, I still need Prisma. I still use Prisma to do all of the database migrations and manage that. And it just adds an extra level of safety and security so that if I need to spin something up again, I'm not having to try and do all that stuff manually. I feel like it's all saved and secure.
Cool. Yep. That's awesome to hear. And that's a piece of feedback that we get a lot. People really find that working with the ORM is a much better path to accessing their database as opposed to writing their own queries, right? Needing to come up with their own custom SQL queries. But a lot of people just don't like working with SQL, right? It's kind of for developers, especially for front-end focused developers who dabble in backends, that's kind of a world that they aren't super competent in, perhaps, and having a tool that gives them access, especially in a type-safe way, that's the biggest thing. That's just a huge benefit for people who maybe aren't as familiar with database world as they might otherwise be.
Yeah, well, the timing of this whole recording is really interesting because Brad and I were talking about, Prisma just came out with some new features. We should have somebody from Prisma on. And I was like,
awesome.
Let's have Ryan on. And then like literally that day, Mark Hess, who we've also had on the show, DM'd me and said, hey, I would love for Ryan to come on your show.
Awesome.
Perfect.
It was from both sides. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Really good to hear.
Yeah. So one of the new things that Prisma dropped that have been looking into for a while is like where to host my database. And Prisma came out with a hosted Postgres offering. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, we call it Prisma Postgres. It's just recently launched in general availability, and you're absolutely right. It's a hosted Postgres offering, which a lot of people, when they hear that, they're like, "Man, there's a lot of Postgres providers on the market. There's a lot of companies doing Postgres and giving you a database." That you can hit from Prisma or without Prisma, what have you. And so the question that we've had a lot is like, what is going on here? Like, why do we need another Postgres provider? And a big part of it is people who use Prisma, they kind of have this expectation that there's a database that comes with it. So, for people who have been around Prisma for a while, they know the open source project and the ORM, and they kind of understand that you can go to whatever database really with it, and you can access MySQL database, SQL Server, MongoDB, the list goes on. But what we found is that people who were new coming to Prisma would click around and try to find where they can start their hosted database, because that's the next natural step after you start interacting with the database. You got to deploy it somewhere, and they left frustrated because there wasn't anything on offer. So yeah, it's really like having a Postgres offering. It's kind of a response to that almost demand that came in from the user base. People, can spin up a database anywhere and access it with Prisma, but there was, I think, both an expectation and also just like a strong desire from a lot of Prisma users to say, we love Prisma. Can you, Prisma, actually give us a database to work with? So that was a lot of the impetus for it. And yeah, we're super excited that it's in GA now, production ready. People can use it for their production apps, and so far people seem to be having really good success with it. So we're very excited for it.
Awesome.
So, like, there's a lot of database types that Prisma can work with. SQLite, MySQL, Postgres. Why did you guys choose Postgres?
So that's a very good question. I think biggest reason is that is arguably the most used database from the segment of web developers that Prisma's audience sits within. There's usage across all databases, but if you look at the numbers, Postgres is at the top. And that informs certain decisions, like the Prisma init command, for example, npx Prisma init. When you initialize a new project, the default assumption is Postgres. It gives you Postgres as the type of database you're connecting to, and gives you a sample Postgres string. So it's because Postgres is sitting kind of at the top of the market in general, and also we find Prisma's developers, they're targeting that database, more so than other databases as well. And this is seen, I think, too, in the market in general. Like, you've got other companies who are offering Postgres and doing so strictly on Postgres, right? They're not offering Postgres plus these other types. So there's this kind of, I think the market is converging a lot on Postgres as being, I guess, a super capable database, very extensible, lots of good options for adding a huge range of extensions that are community built, and just a very capable database in general.
Yeah, and you mentioned these other companies, guys like Supabase, PlanetScale, offering hosted Postgres.
Well, PlanetScale is a bit different. They are the tests, which is like a MySQL
that's
derivative,
right.
I guess maybe you'd call it, something like that. So that's an interesting bit of a different case. And I actually asked them at one point, like, are you planning to do a Postgres offering at some point? And I think the answer was a little bit ambiguous, but the general sense was no. Like, MySQL and Vitesse, this world that they're in, is what they will offer and continue to offer. The interesting point that they made is that there should not be a ton of difference for most people. If, let's say, they've been using Postgres and they need to use something like MySQL, they're not going to feel it in a hard way. Necessarily. I mean, maybe there's certain cases where that's not going to be true. Maybe you're using all sorts of Postgres extensions that wouldn't make it viable to work with PlanetScale. But in any case, yeah, it's interesting. MySQL for them, but Postgres seems to dominate the market across the board, for the other ones.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag. I was going to say, if I've been going back and forth between the two, enums is probably the one that I've seen the biggest pushback on, because you can get enums within Postgres, but not MySQL. But I mean, that makes another case, though, for Prisma, is you can just swap out the adapter. You can also use it with Mongo. Yep. We haven't even talked about that.
Mongo as well. That's right.
You can just swap out that connection string and all of your stuff still works.
Yep. And some caveats there, obviously, especially if you're going from like a relational database to something like Mongo, there are things that you will need to adjust likely in your app code so that you can properly query your database and properly create new records and stuff like that, just because of the differences in architectures. But yeah, in general, you're right. And I've done that before, actually. I started, I can't remember if it was starting with Postgres and going to PlanetScale or the other way around for a project long ago, but it was that situation where I was using Prisma, and I just basically swapped out that connection, those connection details, and within maybe an hour, it was working. So people aren't necessarily swapping databases every day. It's not a very common occurrence, but there are times when you need to, and having an ORM sit as an abstraction on top of your database access makes it a lot easier to do that work, I think.
Well, one of the things that Brad's been working on is building a starter for his remix projects. And I think,
nice.
Even if you're not hot swapping your like the database Prisma is using, if you say Prisma is a part of my starter template, it's going to be on all my projects, then it doesn't matter project to project, whether it's using SQL or Postgres or Mongo to some extent, but you can know going into the project, I'm still familiar with the queries and the mutations and things like that I'm writing because it all uses Prisma.
Yep, absolutely.
So what kind of other features does this Prisma hosted database have? Is it just your typical like backups, or does it do the cool stuff like branching, and how does serverless play into all this?
For sure. So branching is not there in the same way you would see it with offerings, like PlanetScale. But the I think the core feature of Prisma Postgres that makes it very compelling is that it's a serverless database that runs on a very, very specialized architecture, which means a lot of efficiencies and things like no cold starts, for example. So we've probably all seen this problem of you're working on something serverless, you've got a function deployed somewhere and it's not invoked that often. And the next time it is invoked, it's like a spin up of 20, 30 seconds, a minute, maybe sometimes. And so obviously that's not very good for most applications. And there's this reality that we live in where a lot of projects, maybe they don't get high traffic at all hours of the day. And maybe there are peak times and then, overnight it goes to sleep, but you still have the odd user that needs to come in or whatever. So the really cool thing about Prisma Postgres is because of the architecture that it's built on, it doesn't have this cold start problem. So if your database isn't accessed, let's say, for a period of time, it will not take that same amount of upstart time that it takes normally in a serverless environment to get back going. So that's a really good win for for your application's performance in general and the overall user experience. And then the way that it's architected as well means that it's really kind of trivial almost to set up a new database. So that means, and if you step through it in the Prisma console or through the CLI where you can set up your new database, it's a new database gets set up for you in a matter of maybe 15 seconds. And much of that is not even the time that it takes to actually do the database creation step behind the scenes, but it's more just like kind of admin time around that process. So, a new database in 15 seconds, that sort of thing. So it's very, the kind of phrase we threw around is like creating a database should be as easy as creating a Notion page, that sort of thing. And that's the reality today based on the architecture. And so I think what it means is like people are more able to get their databases for any given side project they're working on, any kind of, like if they're working on a feature branch, maybe they want to put a new database in place temporarily to put some data there and work on their feature branch. And also it opens up this possibility to do things like potentially like a per tenant database, for example, right? So there's these issues that come up in multi-tenant applications where depending on the needs and sort of regulatory requirements of whatever field you're in, maybe your data can't be mixed in with other tenants' data. Maybe there actually needs to be some kind of beyond logical, so like physical separation between databases. And because of the architecture that Prisma Postgres has, that there's a very possible path is to spin up a new database per tenant and to have multiple databases going. So yeah, tons of cool possibilities based on the architecture. And we can dive more into that, but beyond that, like the typical things like backups and stuff like that you'd come to expect with a provider are all there. There's a whole other side to it as well with other capabilities that you get through Prisma Postgres. So things like caching, connection pooling, real-time events, optimization insights and things like this, which we can certainly talk about as well. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Brad, but that's kind of the high level of things for Prisma Postgres.
Yeah, it sounds like it's more than just a regular old hosted database.
For
I'm
sure,
curious your approach to serverless here. Is there a bunch of read replicas with like a single, source of truth for database writes, or like how do you accomplish that?
So the architecture itself is it's a really kind of interesting mix of technologies. So it's the serverless, the way we build our serverless database is essentially on something called unikernels. And unikernels are this, you can think of them as a very bare bones, very specialized, like hyper specialized VM setup. There's some other technologies in there as well, something called Firecracker, which are essentially these resources that they can only do one thing, and that one thing is they can run Postgres. They really can't do anything beyond that. So what this means is they're very cheap to set up and snapshots, and they can just rest there. They can be, spun up, spun down very, very simply. And so the whole architecture allows for like this fast snapshotting situation of, snapshotting the database. The next time it's accessed, it'll pick up from where that snapshot was. And so there's more, and I can link a doc as well about kind of the architecture in general and the lifetime of a Prisma Postgres query. But yeah, in general, this kind of architecture that we've got set up based on unikernels is what enables all this.
Cool. So like you can assume that there's no delay between users if one user writes to the DB and another reads from it. Like they're going to get that new data.
They'll get that new data. There is, yes, like any kind of latency concerns there or anything are not a concern. The other thing too is we've got like a caching layer that is built in, because Prisma Postgres is served by what started out as like a product. It was a product before Prisma Postgres came around called Accelerate. And Accelerate is something that handles all of the connection pooling for you, and things like caching. It offers that as well. And so it's this layer that sits in front of the database, and the way that you actually access your Prisma Postgres database doesn't look the same as your connection string that you might normally get.
Sure.
That you can plug into your environment variable, or you could use those pieces in like a Table Plus or Data Grip or whatever. It is a connection string that goes to a URL, Prisma data.net URL, and it's got an API key. And that is handled by Accelerate, which figures out all of the details for which connection to make to which database,
right?
How to pull from the connection pool to make that connection to the downstream database. And it's so it offers things like caching and connection pooling, which gives us opportunity to serve cache data based on your specific requirements. So there's no assumptions made about caching. You have to opt into how you want to strategize your caches on the per query basis. So all that to say, like there are scenarios where you would be deliberately serving some stale data, potentially, but in terms of read-write latency or anything like that, getting fresh data, if you are intending to always serve fresh data, that's certainly by default.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned Accelerate. I consider myself like a very plain Prisma user. I use it for, the ORM capabilities. I love that library. But I know that Prisma offers all these other features like
right.
Accelerate, like Pulse. And I'm assuming now with this new hosted Postgres, these are kind of built in. You already mentioned how Accelerate is kind of like the thing powering the connections to the hosted database. But like, what about things like Pulse, or what about like the database viewer that you have locally? How are all those built in?
That's right. Yeah. So that touches on a couple other, products. What's, I guess, would be considered products initially of Prisma, but are now just things you can do with your Prisma Postgres database.
Mm-hmm.
And Pulse, let's talk about Pulse a bit. That's one of them. Basically the workflow is like you have to enable it in your Prisma console after you have spun up your Prisma Postgres database. And Pulse gives you this way to listen for events in your database. So you can think of that like if something is written to the database, if a record is created, it's going to produce an event that can be consumed wherever. And generally that's in the spot where you are using your Prisma clients, essentially. So what you can imagine is like you've instantiated your Prisma clients, and then you extend it with your Pulse API key. We give you an API key to use there. And then what you get on your essentially on your models is you get this new method called stream. And if you call stream, you are subscribing to any events that are happening in your database. What you can do then is you can like iterate over them, filter down to specific kinds of events. Maybe you just want to be concerned with create events, but the others are there as well. Like update and delete will be surfaced for you, which then lets you do whatever you might need to do with those events. So you have a spot to listen for them. Maybe you need to update a UI in real time. You can set up a little WebSocket server to serve your UI. Now you've got a real-time experience, and that is a fairly quick setup too. So those that need actual real time in their applications and they're using Prisma, it's fairly simple to do. But maybe it's other stuff too. Like maybe you just have some background process that's always on and it's listening for events, and then maybe adding to like an audit table or doing some other downstream work. But this change data capture scenario that you've got then allows you to kind of have the primitives to work with to do whatever you might need to do with changes to your database to react to them. So that's Pulse. That comes with every Prisma Postgres database, but you need to turn it on first. And then so the Studio scenario too is interesting. It was always just like a local thing. Where you'd run npx Prisma Studio, you'd get a Studio window. It's a data viewer. You get to look through your data. You get to do all the CRUD operations you might need to against your database. It's nicer to work with than a table editor in a lot of ways because you get things like the relationships. It's based on your Prisma schema, so the relationships between your models are established, and you get to work with those directly in your table editor now, where you can look up related fields easily, create new items with related items based on whatever your schema has. And so what we did is we decided that experience really should live alongside the Prisma Postgres database where you're managing it. And that is now in the Prisma console. So where you manage your Prisma Postgres database, you'll also find a Studio tab, which you can launch that same Studio experience. And it's nice too, because it's kind of it's more of a collaborative experience now. So you can go in with your team, multiple people can work on the same database and edit things or view things or whatever you need to do. So it's in both places now. Any
changes to like the seeding process? Can I run that seed script locally, or is there something in like the UI that you set up somehow?
So in terms of seeding from the UI, no, but it doesn't look any different than it did before. If you are wanting to seed locally, so you'd have the same experience. You run npx Prisma db seed, you'd have a seed.ts file in place, and same deal. Use Prisma client to create new records and do whatever you want to do in your seed script.
Awesome. And then what about like slow queries and stuff like that, right? I'm a naive front-end developer. Tell me where I'm screwing up, right? Does Hosted Postgres do anything like that for us?
Yeah, there is a tool that you can also enable called Optimize, and that is going to listen to your queries essentially, and it's going to record when you ask it to record. It's going to record queries coming from your application. So your application continues to work, it accesses your data, but the queries that it's making get recorded by Optimize for analysis, essentially. So what you get is a report, and it's going to show you what is running slowly, or if there's any recommendations that we have based on the query patterns that you've got, as to what can be changed to make things better, right? And so, this is like the queries that are slow, but it's also things like, for example, there is this type in Postgres called money, and it's not the best type to work with if you are trying to deal with currency. Instead, there's a different type that you might want to use, right? You can totally work with it, but a recommendation that we've established is, if you're using that type, consider this other type instead. So things like that will be serviced for you based on patterns that you've got within your schema, within your queries as well.
Even taking that a step back in the writing of the schema, you guys have a fantastic VS Code extension that makes it really easy for autocomplete. There's been so many times where I'm like, how does this relationship work? And VS Code or Cursor because I mean, it's all using VS Code under the hood, just like makes a suggestion, or it'll go ahead and preemptively add the other fields that I need on the corresponding database, which is just fantastic. Or excuse me, corresponding model.
The model, yeah, for sure. That's the schema language is something that's, I mean, that's kind of at the core of Prisma. That's one of these items alongside the ORM that people have known for a long time and have really bought into. I think it's one of those core pieces that has helped to establish the audience that really likes to use Prisma. And you know, there's different ways to do modeling. There's different ways to get a schema together, and some of the other products in the space, they do modeling in different ways, and some people, you know, like those different ways that are more TypeScript focused, let's say, and don't have a custom language. It's one of the things that some people don't like for whatever reason. Others love it. Is this idea? There's this custom language, you know, that you're using to create your schemas, and we call it the Prisma schema language. And I think what people love, those who do love it, it's just like simple to see what your database looks like from a quick glance. You're not looking at UML diagrams and, you know, trying to sort out connections between things. Instead, it's like you can just easily top-down parse various models. You see, oh, I've got a relationship here, and then it's what, command click into that relationship to get down to that one. You can see the fields there. And so I think the thing that people really like is, if they're working with a teammate on getting a schema together, it's like they can sketch out a schema very quickly and easily. And it's not sketching in that, like, okay, later we've got to go translate this to something that actually works. It's, you know, sketching with text, let's say, but at the end of it, you've got something that actually is going to work to give you a database that you want. So yeah, it's interesting. The idea of establishing a schema strictly in TypeScript, I think, is something that some people gravitate towards, but like personally, and I think for, you know, most of our audience and for a lot of others out there, this idea of having a very simple language to look at to do that is the more compelling choice.
You know, it's always funny to when those simplified syntax choices work out and when they don't. Like in some cases, I look at, let's say, Tailwind, who invented their own, you know, little domain specific language around certain classes and things. And some of those I avoid because I think the naming is weird or it doesn't feel right. And I like regular CSS in some cases. But looking at, let's say, Prisma schema versus, let's say, a SQL definition of a table, 10 times I'm picking, you know, Prisma schema files, 100%.
Yep.
And I was building a user table and a password reset table the other day. Copilot knew exactly what I was talking about, and like, boom, it was done. And
absolutely.
And then if it screwed up, like the VS Code extension would have had a red squiggle saying like, hey, you know, hey, I got this wrong.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to hit this right on the head.
Let's do it.
I don't want to talk ill will of other systems because I don't even have a context for this other system I'm going to mention.
Right.
But let's just compare and contrast for when you would reach to Prisma over, say, something like Drizzle, because I feel like that's another competitor in the sense of ORM, not competitor in the sense of all the services that you guys offer.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And, you know, Drizzle is certainly a popular option in this world, I think. The thing that I sort of have come to have thoughts on about Drizzle is like, it's solving, let's say, the same thing at the end of the day. You want type safe access to your database, but it is solving it in a different way that has ergonomics that are different and that are going to have effects on your workflow and how you're working with your teams. And so, you know, when people compare Prisma and Drizzle, one thing that I think is often overlooked is like Drizzle does have this little bit of an ORM feel where you can do, and when I say ORM, I kind of mean like you've got some method that's available that is not mapped directly to like a database statement. So like a find many or a find unique or a create many, these kinds of things. Drizzle's got a bit of that. You know, I mean, the last time I looked anyway, you can do a find or a find many, but it kind of stops at a certain point where you don't have this full ORM experience like Prisma does. So Prisma, it's like anything you want to do with your database, you can do it through a method that's exposed on your models. Whereas what Drizzle does give you is like a query builder. And a query builder is fundamentally different, I think, because it is giving you functions that map to database operations for you to compose your own queries. And I guess the thing that I've thought about that is like, yes, that is good and functional. And the fact that you get type safety out of it, that's great. But it brings the developer fairly close to the experience of writing just SQL, right? The argument is that that is what developers want, is they want to be close to the experience of writing SQL. I think that's going to be true for a segment of developers, but I think there's a whole segment as well that says, I don't want to think about SQL. I want something that has an API that is predictable and that is going to be easy to, it is not something that I need to necessarily compose together every time I want to create something in my database or read something. With the query builder pattern, I think like you're kind of like picking things off the shelf every time you want to create a query, and you're sticking them together and composing them together, and that's fine. But there's this whole segment of developers that want just an ORM experience, like give me just, a method to call. And so that's a big difference. I think another big difference, and the one that I find Prisma really shines at, is what we just talked about, which is managing your schema. Custom language to manage your schema. Again, some people don't like the idea of a custom schema language. Some people want to do it in TypeScript. But the experience of doing that strictly in TypeScript that I've seen is just things are verbose, and like there's definitions and callbacks, and establishing like many-to-many relationships requires like 3 separate functions that need to tie together and reference one another. And it's just like, if I could do that in 2 lines of Prisma schema language, I'll take that. So there's that. And, I think it's like, there's arguments as to, various people have their various arguments for why they might prefer Drizzle or move to Drizzle or something like that. And one of those arguments is like, it's got less of a footprint. It's, TypeScript only, these kinds of things. And I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is like Prisma has gone through various evolutions and continues to like make improvements all the time for the product as a whole. And one of those things is listening to those needs and listening to those pieces of feedback for this preference for TypeScript, and this preference to not have things like, and maybe the two of you have heard of this a lot, is like this Rust binary that's included when you are using Prisma. It's this query engine that sits at the center of Prisma. It's written in Rust, and it's this binary file that's got to run wherever you're running Prisma. And so there's been a decision kind of recently, going back a couple months, is that we're rewriting that. We're going away from Rust for the most part to TypeScript for that. So the experience is going to be, there's this bit of latency that's going to be really reduced when we're going between the ORM and your database, because there's this like non-trivial amount of time that is required to serialize and deserialize between the Rust engine and your ORM. So that's going to be really effective. And the other thing that's going to be great too is like this binary, it's not trivial in size. Like it is a bit of a footprint when you go to deploy or whatever. And so that'll be stripped down. And so the experience is going to be much closer to something that is pure TypeScript, easier to work with, that sort of thing. And I think at that point, it's going to be a really kind of great scenario. You've got all these benefits that we've talked about already, plus, something that doesn't require this heavier binary as well.
Awesome.
What other kinds of things are like coming up in Prisma? I feel like, this whole hosted Postgres thing was like a huge announcement, something that I had been waiting for a while out of y'all. And what else is coming in the future?
What's coming in the future? Good question. So, obviously continuing to solidify Prisma Postgres and build on the feature set there. Some things that folks have really been interested in is stuff like how can I how can I secure down my database permissions wise to various records or various rows or something. And so, like Supabase, for example, really has a good kind of like very visible experience for working with RLS. RLS, row level security, it's something that's just in a Postgres. It's something in Postgres, but they expose this way to work with it. And so it's pretty clear that people want this permissions experience, this way to affect permissions to their database. And so I think you can expect to see something around access to your database as one thing, and being able to secure it down. And then I think the thing that people are interested in is just like a typical feature set of a database provider that might you might otherwise see, like, I don't know, things like point in time recovery perhaps, or stuff like this. So yeah, no kind of like official announcements or anything, but those are some of the feels that we've got from the community for what they're interested in.
Very cool.
So rolling back, you're pretty new at this position, right? Although not really. You want to explain your history with
Sure, yeah.
Prisma?
Yeah, so for those that may have followed me on Twitter or whatever, they might have noticed that this is round number 2 at Prisma. I worked at Prisma in 2020, and I was there from something like April of 2020 till the summer of 2021. And then I went off to do work on a product of my own, a course hosting product. So that was this thing where you could host a course and get some advice for how to market it and launch it and stuff like that.
Funded by.
What's that?
I was going to say funded by PWV.
PWV. Well, it was built with Redwood JS. That's
there you go.
That was the technology that was at the core of it, which was a very good experience. That was kind of my like entry point into being a community member of Redwood, was working with it that way. And my introduction to Redwood actually came through that first experience at Prisma, because Redwood obviously ships Prisma with it. And so I got plugged into the team, and then I said, this is a very nice framework to work with. I think I'm going to use this for my project. And so anyways, I did that for a bit, and got some really good early a good early user base. But I found this problem of just like traction in general, and also keeping users motivated to finish out their course, which is a very kind of big, heavy lift anyway, and a very aspirational thing to do in many cases, was a tricky part of it. And made the decision, as a solo founder, the kind of work I would need to do to be that kind of coach to the user base to actually do the work that I want them to do in the application in the first place is going to be a little bit untenable. So decided to sunset that. And in that time as well, I was doing some consulting work, working on various web development projects and application builds and stuff like that. But then, decided a couple of years on that I missed working at Prisma. The experience that I had there was phenomenal. And the reason for leaving in the first place had nothing to do with Prisma at all. It was more so that I wanted to go and try my hand at this project of mine. So anyway, I kind of came to a point where I said, I wonder if it makes sense to try to hop back on board, and circumstances were fortunate. It all lined up with something that was open, and here I am again, round number 2.
How did you go about talking to Prisma about coming back? Did you just kind of like DM your old manager, or did you just go to their page and apply? Like,
well, it was interesting. I had a call with Soren's the CEO of Prisma, and a couple of members of the product team, because they wanted some feedback on the experience working with Prisma. And this was leading up to Prisma Postgres, and wanting to understand better, as someone who's built applications that are in production for clients built on Prisma, what's good to work with, what do you need, that sort of stuff. And after that conversation, I mentioned to Soren, like, if you are ever, looking for somebody to work on product stuff a little bit, let me know. I might be interested in that. And he said, we actually have like a role open right now that is fairly product adjacent. It's developer advocacy more properly, but it's, in direct line with product. And kind of things fell from there. Yeah, just went on to chat with the team and everything made sense. So here I am.
Sweet.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Kind of tying those two things together. Hopefully this will be a softball question.
Sure.
If somebody is interested in learning about Prisma, where should they go?
If they're interested in learning about Prisma, I think the best place is just the main website as one, so prisma.io. We're very active on Twitter. The handle is Prisma on Twitter, X/Twitter, that is. And I would say YouTube as well. Like we are producing a lot more YouTube content these days. A couple of videos a week on various features that you can get with Prisma, various things you can do with it. So the YouTube channel, I believe, is Prisma Data on YouTube. You can check that out. Yeah, and there's a whole slew of... What's that, sorry?
Sorry. Do you still have your course? I was thinking if you still had your course on your platform, that kind of also ties the things together. So
ties them together well. So you can check out, I've got a bunch of course material on a site that I run called Holodeck. Holodeck.run is the URL. And yeah, there's lots of Prisma content there. There's kind of the 0 to 1 experience, getting started with Prisma. You'll find that there, and some more advanced topics as well. So you can check that out along with, other web development content that exists there, stuff about security, especially if you're working with React and you want to find some ways to harden your React application. I've got a course on that and a few other bits as well that you might be curious about.
Sweet. Brad, do you have anything else?
No. I was going to ask questions about hey, I was trying to do stuff in CI with Prisma the other day. Help me solve my problem. I do love having a podcast for that reason, but we'll save that for another conversation.
Sounds good.
That can be in the after show. So stick around. Awesome. Well, we will move into the next segment of the show, which is our picks and plugs section, where we pick something that we like. It can be anything tech, non-tech related, something we bought on Amazon, a show we watched, and then a plug. So usually this is something that we worked on or just kind of shameless plug. Does anybody want to go first?
How about Brad?
We recorded yesterday and I am fresh out of picks.
Oh, no.
But I will plug my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Brad Garrepy. I'm doing a lot of live streaming on my Remix starter, and I'll just plug my Remix starter. It's github.com/Brad Garrepy/remix-app. And I'll drop both of those links in the chat. You can watch how that thing gets going. I forgot password flow last night, doing some Prisma stuff.
There you go.
Very nice and easy.
Is the starter that you've got a kind of like the things that you would expect in a framework like Laravel, let's say, that gives you, the stuff that you need to do in a typical application, like auth, for example, maybe some other things too?
I've got one called Remix Starter, which is just like, this is how I set up Remix.
Yep.
ESLint, Prettier, my GitHub Actions, that kind of like basic stuff.
Cool.
Change logs, all that. And then I'm like, I need that, but for apps. And so I just took the Remix Starter, extended it with a database, with auth, with some user-specific data stuff. And so then I'll have my two. Like, I'm just building a quick website, or I'm building a quick web app, and I've got starters for both.
Nice. Very cool. I'll check that out.
Ryan, are you ready?
Yeah, I can give my pick and plug. So my pick is, I was thinking about this because it was in the notes for what to come prepared with. And I typically don't have good picks, but I have a good one, which is, you probably have seen these like frames that you can get, these screen, they're essentially like a picture frame that has a screen that scrolls through your photos, right? These kinds of things.
Yeah.
And we'd gotten them for like the grandparents in the past. And I always thought, like, that's cool. We don't need that for the house because, like, if I want to look at pictures, I can just, have my phone to see pictures of my kids. But we got one for ourselves this Christmas, and it's just like added so much like little moments of joy throughout the day, because it'll scroll for through your pictures for you and show you memories from when they were little and stuff like that. And it's interesting, something that I just missed because I could just do that on my phone, and it's such a simple thing has led to so many little joyful moments during the day. So that's my pick. Get yourself an E-frame if you want to see automated pictures of your fun memories.
Which one did you get, out of curiosity?
Skylight, I think, is the brand. The Skylight frame. Yeah,
we got the Aura frame for my parents.
Okay,
and my wife's parents. They both like them.
Very cool. Yeah, the grandparents love them. They get excited every time that little notification comes up.
Skylight is the one that does the calendar thing. That looks awesome too.
I don't know the calendar thing. I'm gonna have to look at this.
It's like a giant iPad that has like calendars and
to-do lists, right, yeah, I've seen
touch
that
screen.
Right, yeah.
Like a dashboard.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, you put it in your kitchen
Henry
or whatever.
And I've talked about that.
Yeah.
But part of me, being the programmer that I am, I'm like, I could build that, and we could just have like a
an
cheap
iPad
TV
on the wall.
that I just,
yeah,
or it's like a cheap TV, and I'll just stick in like I don't know, like an Amazon Fire or whatever the Google is, and we can stream in one of my websites or something. Yeah. I haven't done it yet. He's like, yeah, in your free time, you do that.
Yeah,
that doesn't exist. That's funny. Yeah, so Skylight is my pick. And then a plug, I would plug maybe the Holodeck YouTube channel. So talked about, cool. Like the Prisma stuff and holodeck.run, the website, but you can also check out, there's a YouTube channel for Holodeck as well. And there's some content there that is not, it's like a little bit older now, and touches on frameworks that have been updated since, let's say, but there's some more content there. And I think it's holodeck_run on YouTube.
Sweet. So for my pick, I'm going to pick a TV show on Netflix called Making Fun. My kids stumbled upon this show, and it's kind of like, it has Mythbusters vibes to it. But what happens is these kids come up with these crazy inventions that they've like drawn this picture of, and then they show it to these guys. They like pitch their idea, and then the guys end up building it. So it's things like, I want a bicycle with a unicorn that farts glitter, and they'll be like, they're like, oh, that's a terrible idea. Who would want that? And that's part of the stick, is that they're kind of grumpy about it, but then they go and build it. There's another one. The episode's called like Catapult something. Okay. Anyways, they were talking about all these cats that this family had, and they're like, they poop all over our yard. So then they built this machine that would help pick up cat poop and stuff. So anyways, it's, the kids have loved it because they're building these inventions that kids have come up with. So
what's the name of it, sorry?
It's called Making Fun.
Making Fun.
Netflix.
My kids would love that, I think.
Yeah, they've been binge watching that. It's been between that and Is It Cake? Which is also a great show. Yeah.
That's funny.
And then for my plug, I'm going to plug my Build 12 project. So you can go to build12.com, and I have taken on the ridiculous task of trying to build 12 things in 12 months. So
nice.
I am in the middle of project number 2, and I'm working. This one is providing a interface for using forms. So a lot of times if you just have a marketing site, you don't necessarily want to integrate with a database. You can just reference this form system, and it'll collect all that data. So there's a few systems that are out there that do that, but just, building that for myself. And the cool part, it is using Prisma on the back end. Nice. But it's the other day I built a custom Zapier integration so that I would have first party support for that. Never done that before. I've used Zapier in tons of workflows, but I've never written my own custom integration. So
what's the process? How does it work to write your own custom thing? Is it all like you can do it in TypeScript and deploy it or something, or how does it work?
So I opted for, on the Zapier side, you can just go into their developer panel, and I said, hey, I want to build a custom app. And at that point you can either use their UI or you can write code. And I was just curious, what does their UI look like? How easy is this in terms of drag and drop? And it is actually really easy on their side. Basically, what you're doing is you're just setting up these different endpoints. So you say, hey, I have a trigger. Here's the endpoint. And that's really all there is to it on their end. Then you have to write the code on your side. So I'm just creating basically these API hooks that say, hey, go ahead and grab all this information from the database and put this in a JSON format to send back to Zapier. And then that's how you actually create, if you've used Zapier to like create, so for example, if I make a connection and in this case, I'm like, hey, I want to select from a drop down all the different websites that I've created within my system. So I can select from the drop down that website. And then the next one, I want it to filter the forms that are available based on my website selection. So what that ends up being is actually 3 different triggers. 2 are private that I can only see and access, which is a trigger to grab all the websites, a trigger to grab all the forms. And then the public trigger is the one that says, hey, when a user makes a submission, then I use those pieces to grab all the content. If that makes sense.
Interesting.
So the tricky part with the form side, like when a user makes a submission, you have 2 different approaches there. You can either use polling or you can use real time. And so polling is pretty simple. It's a similar format in the sense that you just create a webhook and then Zapier will say, I'm going to poll it every 1, or I think it's 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the user's plan to determine how I'm going to collect all that information. So in my case, I'm like, well, if I'm sending out email notifications, so somebody makes a submission, I want that to be pretty automatic. How hard is it to do this real-time thing? The real-time thing is actually pretty simple. The only difference is what you do is you have, let's see, how does that work? When they set it up, you actually have a table, a model within your Prisma schema, specifically for Zapier. So what that does is it says, hey, when you create an entry, this is the hook that I want you to ping. And so then anytime you have an entry, you have to manually trigger it. So it's one extra step in the sense that you have to save that information on your side and then trigger it to ping their servers. But it was still pretty simple to set all that up. So anyways, I'll be creating a YouTube video about it.
Very nice. That sounds good.
A lot easier than I thought it would be. I'm like, more people should integrate with Zapier. So cool. Well, I said picking my plug. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Ryan, for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you are listening in your podcatcher of choice, please leave a rating and review. That helps us get other great guests and sponsors and helps other people find our show. For now, that's all we got. Awesome. Brad, did you have a specific CI/CD question?
I think it comes down to Playwright, but it was one of those things where I'm trying to run end-to-end tests in GitHub Actions.
Okay.
At a SQLite database.
Sure.
So I was like, oh, I'll just like run my seed command in GitHub Actions.
Yep.
And then, go through the normal authentication process in my app.
Yep.
It seems like it didn't like the whole session storage thing. But I'm not sure what the true problem is. Like Remix uses cookie session storage in order to persist login state. And I don't think it's playing well with Prisma. Or not Prisma, Playwright, excuse me. Yet everything works locally, so I have no idea what's going on.
And this is the place where it's failing, though, is in the GitHub Action?
It's failing in the GitHub Action in CI, but everything is passing locally when I'm running it via Playwright. Both use SQLite, same database seed, but basically you hit, enter your email, your password, you hit OK, and it's like, sorry, we never see the login screen after that.
Interesting.
And
so you're not sure if it's a database issue or if it's just a Playwright issue, I guess. It's unclear which one it is?
Yeah, I'm not sure like if the database isn't getting seeded correctly and therefore I'm not finding the right user login stuff, or if it's like we actually logged you in, we're making this cookie, it's just, a headless browser isn't doing the thing it's supposed to do with cookies.
Yep.
But do you see that, like people seeding databases in CI? Or is it like, no, don't run it locally in your GitHub Action, like make a hosted database for testing or something?
There's various ways that people do it. Like one of the challenges, is your actual database that you're using for the app a SQLite database in the end, or is it Postgres or something?
Haven't figured that one out yet, but
Okay,
I think
gotcha.
it would be kind of cool to just like use SQLite for local dev / like testing, and then sure, deployed app could be Postgres.
That is I find that to be a compelling idea as well. I just worry that that's going to give you mixed behavior, which might not be what you want. In terms of the way that people run their tests and deal with a database, it's a mix of things. Like some people will have a test database deployed somewhere and wipe it and reseed it, on a deployment, let's say. It'd be interesting to try a remote database and see if you're able to seed it via CI.
Right.
And see if it's maybe just like I don't know, maybe there is something different in the environment where it's running on GitHub Actions versus locally that's affecting it, or a permissions issue or something.
Can you
file?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Brad, can you log that stuff out? Because I know GitHub Actions has a panel where you can go in and see everything that it's running on the server.
Yeah, I've got Playwright spitting out my web server logs, so I can do logging there. And I'm like going through the process of figuring out, okay, what's not working,
Yeah.
Yep.
And the frustrating part is that like you have to make the change, you push, and then you just gotta wait for CI to run.
That branch is a wreck right now. Yeah.
I feel like that's something that I hope gets solved by some company, is like, how do we reduce these CI/CD runs down to a couple seconds as opposed to 15 minutes on each run?
Well, that's what Turbo or whatever it is can do, all the remote distributed caching of build steps. And so if, only one test changed, then I think it can figure that out. And it's gathering all that data from everybody in all your CI pipelines and stuff.
Yep.
It's just me. I'm not operating at that scale.
Yeah. That's the issue too, is like we like to have these nice things, but at the scale that, of one person, maybe it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream.
Cool.
Thanks for sticking on, everybody, for the after show.
Hi, chat.
Listening to all of Brad's problems. We'll be back on next Wednesday. Bye.